The local station, the 10 o'clock news starts now.
Tonight, senators and members of Congress returning to the nation's capital. Weary faces and armed guards nearby. Hours earlier, violence erupted there.
Trump supporters climbed walls, stole federal property, and had a showdown with Capitol Police. In the end, 15 people were arrested, one woman was killed, and the means for communication for President Trump suspended.
This is a live look inside the Capitol building tonight. Lawmakers have resumed the Electoral College vote. There was a state of panic as the Trump supporters stormed the chamber earlier today.
The scene earlier today was chaotic, but things have since calmed down.
Mr. Grassley.
For many people, today will go down in American history as one of the nation's lowest.
News4Jax has a team of reporters covering the fallout from today's events, from Washington, D.C. to Atlanta to right here in Northeast Florida. We've got you covered on the next hour of today's historic violence.
Here's the latest we know right now. Protesters continue to face off with D.C. police in riot gear, as well as the National Guard tonight, but the Capitol building is secure. First Lady Melania Trump's chief of staff resigned tonight, Stephanie Grisham. She did it in the wake of the violent protests today. Meanwhile, National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien, Deputy National Security Advisor Matt Pottinger, and Deputy Chief of Staff Chris Liddell all considering resigning. And on the Senate floor, Kelly Loeffler, a longtime Trump supporter who just lost her U.S. Senate seat in Georgia to the Reverend Raphael Warnock in that runoff election, she said this tonight.
When I arrived in Washington this morning, I fully intended to object to the certification of the electoral votes. However, the events that have transpired today have forced me to reconsider, and I cannot now in good conscience object to the certification of these electors. The violence, the lawlessness, and siege of the halls of Congress are abhorrent and stand as a direct attack on the very institution my objection was intended to protect, the sanctity of the American democratic process.
These are the moments that show pro-Trump supporters stormed Statuary Hall about 2:30 this afternoon. They pushed through barriers and shoved away police officers in order to get inside. The chaos started just after President Trump spoke at a Saving America rally. He continued with his claims that the presidential election was rigged, and he used expletives to describe the process following the November vote. Now, at one point, he told the crowd that he will never give up and never concede. Shortly afterwards, hundreds of his supporters believed that they are taking their matters into their own hands. They did what they describe as stopping the steal. Lawmakers got back to discussing the certification of the Electoral College vote, but that typically ceremonial undertaking this afternoon turned to chaos in Washington, D.C. After a midday rally by Trump supporters who won't accept his defeat in the election, protesters marched to the Capitol and then into the Capitol. Protesters were eventually hanging from the walls inside the building after lawmakers were urged to protect themselves.
Get down under your chairs if necessary, so we have folks entering the rotunda and coming down this way. So we'll update you as soon as we can, but just be prepared. Stay calm.
Those protesters were too many for Capitol Police to repel initially as they rushed the Capitol. That left just a few officers inside the chambers to defend the lawmakers, at this point pulling their guns. Capitol Police did keep most of the protesters outside and detained some of them. Vice President Pence, overseeing the certification in the Senate tonight, tweeted during the lockdown, "This will not be tolerated." President-elect Joe Biden spoke to the nation, saying democracy is under assault in the citadel of liberty.
What we're seeing are a small number of extremists dedicated to lawlessness. This is not dissent. It's disorder. It's chaos. It borders on sedition. And it must end now.
President Trump eventually posted a video on Twitter calling his supporters to go home, but also telling them, "We love you, you're very special, and remember this day." Those tweets eventually taken down. What will certainly be remembered are the images like these and the loss of a life. One woman died, shot Wednesday afternoon in the chaos at the Capitol. And we just got the identity of the woman who died. Ashley Babbitt was a Trump supporter from San Diego. Babbitt died from a gunshot wound reportedly fired by law enforcement. It's unclear what made the officer fire his weapon. Babbitt was an Air Force veteran. She wrote about her trip to D.C. on social media saying, quote, "Nothing will stop us."
Former President Barack Obama expressing his concern over today's riot at the Capitol. He released a scathing statement openly blaming President Trump for today's events. He said in part, quote, "History will rightly remember today's violence at the Capitol, incited by a sitting president who has continued to baselessly lie about the outcome of a lawful election as a moment of great dishonor and shame for our nation. But we'd be kidding ourselves if we treated it as a total surprise," end quote. Mr. Obama also said Republican leaders have the choice right now to, quote, "keep stoking the raging fire or choose reality and America." Today's events, they're being largely condemned by lawmakers, current and former. Former President George W. Bush has been watching everything unfold. He says he's disturbed by what he's seen. He released this statement saying, "It is a sickening and heartbreaking sight. This is how election results are disputed in Banana Republic, not our democratic republic. I am appalled by the reckless behavior of some political leaders since the election." Our local lawmakers in Washington are weighing in on what happened as well. We're being joined right now by News4JAX reporter Scott Johnson. Scott, you spoke with one of our local congressmen who was actually inside the Capitol when all this chaos erupted.
Congressman John Rutherford, Joy. Now, he is certainly condemning what happened in the Capitol, also condemning the president's response to it. But that doesn't mean he's changed his opinion. He still plans to object to some of these states that are under contest, and he really wants to look at whether or not the vote was legitimate. In his mind, he's still going down that road despite what happened today in the U.S. Capitol. Congressman John Rutherford tonight speaking out about the chaos in the U.S. Capitol. He tells me despite the unrest, he still intends to object to specific states, and the chaos inside the Capitol did not affect his intent. But he's still criticizing President Trump's response to the storming of the Capitol, saying the president should have done more to quell the unrest. The president releases a video that many have criticized that say it didn't do enough to stop the violence. What are your thoughts on this? What do you take away from it?
I agree with that. I saw that video. I think he could have been much more directive in his comments, less about the election and himself and more about the safety and protection for the people in our capital.
Florida lawmakers have been putting out statements like Congressman Al Lawson saying, "Today is a sad day for our democracy. This is an embarrassment and a direct result of President Trump's inability to accept his loss. This mob was incited by the president and his 4 years of disgraceful rhetoric." Florida Governor Ron DeSantis writes, "Violence or rioting of any kind is unacceptable, and the perpetrators must face the full weight of the law." And Jacksonville Mayor Lenny Curry says there's a clear difference between peaceful protests and attacking the rule of law. No city should have to endure what we are watching unfold today. I also spoke with Tom Berry. He's a former D.C. Metro PD officer who now lives in Jacksonville. He says this issue could have been handled by Capitol Police, but Metro PD would have also had their hands full with the crowds in the city.
The Metro PD is about 3,600 sworn police officers, but you have to realize that within any agency, no matter what size, a lot of those personnel are not active street personnel or might not even be certified to do crowd control activity. So that diminishes the number available.
He felt the National Guard could have helped shore up some of their needs, but says, at least on the Metro PD end, which he's kind of an expert on, he says they probably didn't have the manpower to handle the sheer volume of people in our nation's capital. We're live tonight. Scott Johnson, Channel 4, the local station.
Scott, thank you. We have new video now just into the newsroom. These are some of the protesters who were taken into custody and put into police vehicles there. You see right there one of them being hands behind his back, being put into a police car here. As you know, 15 arrests, we understand, were made after the violent clash between a handful of rioters and police. You know, one woman died after being shot by law enforcement inside the Capitol building. The other extreme injury that happened was a man who fell from scaffolding climbing on the outside of the Capitol building, last known in critical condition, as we continue to watch this new video of the protester being put into the back of that police car.
Support is growing after one member of the House tweeted that she's drafting new articles of impeachment against President Trump. More than a dozen Democratic members of Congress are calling to impeach the president just 2 weeks before he's to leave office. Representative Ilhan Omar tweeted, "We can't allow him to remain in office. It's a matter of preserving our republic, and we need to fulfill our oath." Other Democratic leaders have called on his administration to invoke the 25th Amendment to remove him from office. The amendment allows the administration to remove a president from office and replace them with the vice president. Well, during today's uninterrupted breaking news coverage, News4JAX political analyst Rick Mullaney joined us and provided some perspective on what happened. He says today's events were unprecedented.
Quite honestly, I don't recall a day quite like it in my lifetime. I certainly remember in the 60s, going back as a young teenager, some of the protests we saw in the 1960s with the Vietnam War. In the context of elections, I've never seen anything quite like it. And so I actually, like so many Americans, I'm trying to understand exactly what is going on.
Mullaney mentioned how President Trump did not condemn the violence on Twitter. Now, some of the president's tweets were flagged and removed because they violated Twitter rules. As a result, his account has been blocked for 12 hours. The president has also been blocked from Facebook for 24 hours.
We're going to take another live look for you. This is inside the U.S. Capitol building tonight. Lawmakers not being deterred by the violence that happened today. The Electoral College vote still going on, happening, and they intend on going through the night here.
And right after this break, News4JAX crime and safety expert Ken Jefferson is going to join us and give us some insight on what the atmosphere might have been like for lawmakers responding to the chaos. Stay with us.
I ask unanimous consent the Senate be in a period of morning business with the following senators permitted to speak therein.
Thanks for staying with us here on the 10 o'clock news. We're going to take a live look outside in Washington, D.C. Much calmer than it's been most of the day and even early this evening. You see police lined up and down the street here. They are enforcing a curfew that began at 6 p.m. It goes until 6 in the morning and apparently is doing what leadership there in Washington, D.C. wanted. People are off the street, and it seems pretty calm.
Yes, earlier, maybe right around dark, firefighter vehicles were there. There were EMTs, ambulances. Those have all cleared out. Right now, our crime and safety expert, Ken Jefferson, is joining us tonight. Yeah, Ken, what happened today is going to unfortunately be etched in American history. And I think a lot of people are talking about law enforcement response here. Hey, were they caught off guard? Who else should be on high alert tonight? We just talked about the people who had been responding there today.
Well, you know, I still look at all these images from today's events, and I'm still in awe that this actually happened in the United States of America, something that has never happened. We see this all over the world happening, but never us, because we are a democracy and it's respected. The Constitution is, for the most part, respected. So I'm still in awe that this sort of thing happened. But there are other states that need to be on high alert because the people are still at an unrest, and violence could break out at any time in any of these places, such as Pennsylvania, such as Georgia, and even Florida. Florida had a few protesters in the state's capital earlier today. Who's to say that they won't come back and they won't be in larger numbers? So I'm certain that law enforcement officials around the country right now actually should be on high alert. Not just these contested states or the states that are getting the most attention, but we should be on high alert. We should be on high alert here in Jacksonville as well. You just never know with these supporters that they might get some gas thrown on this issue and decide to protest here.
Well, Ken, we were looking at images there of police in riot gear. We know that the National Guard is there as well, but they're in a backup role right now. Yeah,
there's over 500 National Guardsmen from Maryland there, and then there's a few D.C. National Guards that's there as well. So they've got reinforcement. They've got the Metro Police, Department of Capitol Police. So they have the manpower now to be able to try to manage these groups. They imposed a 6 p.m. curfew, 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. So they're going to be making sure that that's adhered to. And if not, people are going to have to suffer the consequences there.
Hey, just wrap us up, final 30 seconds or what have you. We heard about pipe bombs being at these different locations, the RNC or DNC. What can you tell us about that, Ken? Is that unusual? Certainly dangerous, right?
Well, the pipe bombs that was found has been rendered safe. One was found in the DNC headquarters there. You know, you're talking about a very volatile and dangerous situation when you're talking about bombs and you're talking about mobs of people storming a certain place or taking over a certain place. So hats off to those law enforcement officials that did a great job today to bring peace and order back and make everything civil.
Ken Jefferson, our crime and safety expert, thank you so much for being with us throughout the afternoon and tonight.
You're welcome.
So the unrest over the Electoral College vote is extending to the Peach State tonight. This is video from earlier today. Trump supporters outside of the Georgia state capitol.
The balance of power in the Senate has shifted because of two critical elections that happened there in Georgia. In just minutes, News4JAX reporter Vic Micolucci tells us how Georgia residents responded to what happened today.
All right, so a breaking news alert from the U.S. Capitol. The Senate has just unanimously rejected an objection to Arizona's electoral vote, an effort to block electoral votes for Joe Biden. Representative Paul Gosar objected to recording his home state's tally after no objection to tallies in Alabama and Alaska. And again, the Senate rejected this challenge, but this is where things were at early this afternoon when Congress had to lock down because of the mob of protesters that invaded the nation's capital.
Well, armed demonstrators also showed up at the Georgia state capitol as Peach State leaders condemned that violence in Washington, D.C.
News4JAX reporter Vic Micolucci has been live in Atlanta all week. Vic, what's the reaction been there in the Peach State?
Well, we saw a lot of tension, a lot of anger, and a lot of frustration from the Republican side here in the state of Georgia. And this afternoon, we saw more than 100 demonstrators out there with flags, with signs, and many with rifles as well as tactical vests and helmets. Some of them went into the state capitol, causing leaders to leave. However, we did not see any violence. And tonight, many local lawmakers are rebuking what's happening in Washington, D.C.
Let you know, in my opinion, that has been a disgrace and quite honestly un-American.
Georgia's Republican Governor Brian Kemp made a late afternoon address to condemn the actions in Washington, D.C., calling for peace and unity, even after two Democrats ousted sitting GOP senators.
And we will move forward together, working on the things that really matter for the people of our state.
The presumed winners also with strong statements against the violence on Capitol Hill. John Ossoff tweeting this: today's insurrectionist attack on the U.S. Capitol was incited by Trump's poisonous lies and flagrant assault on our Constitution. Reverend Raphael Warnock quoting MLK: in this moment of unrest, violence, and anger, we must remember the words of Dr. King. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. Republican Kelly Loeffler also rebuking the acts in D.C., saying, violence is abhorrent, and I strongly condemn today's attacks on our Capitol. We must stand united as one nation under God. The Georgia state capitol in Atlanta also had demonstrators throughout the day, claiming the presidential election and the Senate runoffs were stolen from them. Some civilians were heavily armed, but these protests were peaceful.
It's very disheartening when we see it's so obvious and then we're told, no, you're stupid.
So you don't feel that either of these races were fair?
Correct. I feel like it was a very flawed process between the voting machines and the mail-in ballots and all of the irregularities.
And just moments ago, I got my hands on a statement from the final of the four candidates here in that Senate runoff. Senator David Perdue, who appears to have been unseated, he said, in part, the violence at the U.S. Capitol today is disgraceful and un-American. We are a nation of laws. The world, no level of frustration or disappointment in our political process excuses such despicable, anarchic behavior. So we have reactions now from all 4 people who ran for those Senate seats in the runoffs here in the state of Georgia. All 4 of them strongly condemning the actions on Capitol Hill. I'm Vic Michelucci, live in Atlanta, and we'll be right back.
The city of Washington, D.C. is under a curfew right now. It was set at 6 p.m. after mobs of President Trump supporters stormed Congress.
Whitney Wild joining us live tonight from our nation's capital. Whitney, what is happening right now?
Well, on the streets of D.C., there is finally a sense of calm that has befallen the city. But back on Capitol Hill, after police were able to get control of that area, it is business as usual, with the Senate and the House resuming that joint session to certify the Electoral College results.
For even in the wake of unprecedented violence and vandalism at this Capitol, the elected representatives of the people of the United States have assembled again.
The counting of the Electoral College votes resuming Wednesday night.
We will not be kept out of this chamber by thugs, mobs, or threats.
After rioters tore through the pristine halls of the Capitol, sowing chaos and leaving an ominous message right on the desk of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi.
This assault is just that. It shows the weakness of those who had to show through violence what their message was.
The attempted coup is the first time the U.S. Capitol has been breached since the British attacked and burned the building in August of 1814. Arrests have been made, pipe bombs have been found outside the DNC, RNC, and the Capitol, and a woman has died after being shot inside the Capitol.
I just remember the sense of shock and sorrow that somebody just died and did not need to die because she didn't have a weapon. She wasn't being violent in any way.
Riot authorities have moved in on the mobs, pushing them away from the Capitol. There is a real conversation happening among Republicans, happening among members of the president's own cabinet, that he should be removed from office. Some members of his cabinet floating the idea that they could invoke the 25th Amendment to remove him. Other elected Republicans saying that he should be impeached and removed immediately.
It's a day like we've never seen in our lifetimes. These images, shocking, maddening, upsetting. Rioters storming the U.S. Capitol, some getting away with items belonging to members of Congress, others storming the actual chambers. As night fell in Washington, D.C., the glow of the Capitol building overshadowed by the flashing lights of emergency vehicles. First responders on standby for hours to help anyone hurt in the melee from hours earlier. Take the help! A first peaceful demonstration outside as the Electoral College convened to certify the presidential election results turned chaotic. Pro-Trump supporters numbering in the thousands when suddenly some broke away from the throngs and started scaling the walls. A man rushed away in critical condition after falling 30 feet from scaffolding he was climbing outside the Capitol. In disbelief, we all watched this video of a lone Capitol police officer confronting rioters who had made it deep inside the Capitol, heading toward the congressional chambers. Nearly a minute feels like a lifetime when police backup finally arrives, stopping the intruders in their tracks. Once they got inside,
they broke the glass.
Confusion turns to panic in the House chambers as armed security forces take aim at a door clearly breached. An intercom announcement comes quickly.
Get down under your chairs if necessary, so we have folks entering the rotunda and coming down this way. So we'll update you as soon as we can, but just be prepared.
Intruders hanging from the chamber balcony, storming the room like an army, raising flags and cell phones to record the planned chaos. Trashing congressional offices and stealing the speaker's podium from the U.S. House floor, even violating the vice president's Senate seat. Mike Pence, after being rushed to safety by the Secret Service, later tweeting, "This attack on our Capitol will not be tolerated." Those words echoed by Washington, D.C.'s mayor.
And people that come to our city engaged in unlawful behavior will be held accountable.
Then, as quickly as it all began, it was over. Law enforcement officers in riot gear aligned at the top of the Capitol steps, moving slowly but with purpose to move the crowds away. While inside, nearly 24 of those rioters who were stopped by heavily armed teams were rounded up, put in the back of paddy wagons, and whisked away. As we learned, one woman was dead, shot inside the Capitol building. That woman killed has been identified as Ashley Babbitt, a Trump supporter from San Diego. Babbitt was an Air Force veteran. She wrote about her trip to D.C. on social media saying, quote, "Nothing will stop us."
Former President Jimmy Carter spoke out on today's attack on Capitol Hill as well. Through the Carter Center Twitter, he released a statement urging Americans to support a peaceful presidential transition. It read in part, quote, "Rosalind and I are troubled by the violence at the U.S. Capitol today. This is a national tragedy and is not who we are as a nation. Having observed elections in troubled democracies worldwide, I know that we, the people, can unite."
Tours are chosen.
Thank you, Cole. So we want to take another live look inside the Capitol building tonight. Senator Collins speaking right now as lawmakers have resumed the county electoral college vote. And by the way, U.S. Senators from Florida, Marco Rubio and Rick Scott, have broken with President Trump. They were among those who voted no on the Arizona elector challenge earlier this evening.
Folks, stay with us. The 10 o'clock news is back right after this break.
Administrative and largely ceremonial act. Our job.
We are getting new video into the newsroom of the House chamber. Remember where the rioters broke the doors, breaking the glass? You can see workers here cleaning up the glass. This is what those on Capitol Hill were waiting for, to go back to the Electoral College vote. They were waiting for all of this cleanup to happen inside the chambers because they were basically trashed, as well as congressional offices, by the rioters who got into the Capitol building there.
Difficult when our political party
right now, the Electoral
win.
College continues its work tonight.
We've
as
all
you look
felt that
live
before.
inside the chambers. The
Calling
presidential
an
election
unfair
results, working to review
not
those,
make
refusing
it
to be
so.
deterred by the violence that temporarily took over the Capitol building today. As throngs of peaceful protesters demonstrated outside, you remember a handful of rioting Trump supporters, they stormed inside the building into the House and the Senate chambers. They trashed congressional offices, stole federal property, including the House podium.
With police backup coming from neighboring jurisdictions and states, though, as well as the Army and National Guard, law enforcement teams, they've regained control of the Capitol, making more than a dozen arrests, we're told. We do know that one woman died. She was shot in the shoulder inside the Capitol building. We don't have a lot of details on what exactly happened there. But that is the fatality involved in what happened today. Lawmakers and leaders across the nation and around the world, they've denounced the violence today, many pointing finger at President Trump as those involved in the violence were waving pro-Trump flags.
The president, while asking for calm and an end to the violence, also reiterating his attack on the election process, calling it a fraud. You remember this led to social media suspensions of President Trump's account, Twitter denying him access for 12 hours, Facebook making it 24 hours. And if we can, go back again to that live look inside the chambers as the Electoral College continues its work. They have been itching to get back to work after suspending their count and being able to verify the results of the presidential election. All of them very grateful and stating as such, taking time, each one of them, to say how they denounced the violence today and are glad they were able to get back to work.
But that system will
Folks, stay with us.
prevail.
There is much more to come.
Yeah, we'll be right back after this break with News 4 Jax at 11.
Donald Trump and his legal team have made. And that our